Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Maybe you're thinking of starting a new hobby by adding a chicken or two or three to your backyard. Or maybe you're already a seasoned home chicken owner. Well, you're going to want to hear today's episode. Urban chicken consultant and certified poultry inspector Cherie Sentis-Glover of chickensforeggs.com has advice on how to choose a chick from your local feed or farm store. After all, your neighbors just might not appreciate it if you have a backyard full of roosters. Well, Cherie has tips on how you can avoid that pitfall. Also, she discusses a poultry disease that is ravaging several states currently. It's called HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza. HPAI. It's a serious disease and requires a rapid response because it's highly contagious and often fatal to chickens. So how can you help your flock cut its risk of contracting this decimating disease? Cherie has some good advice on that. It's all in episode 315 of today's Garden Basics, Choosing Backyard Chickens and What is HPAI Disease. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon Jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we're brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. Have you heard of HPAI? What's that? It's highly pathogenic avian influenza. It can devastate poultry. It is taken hold in several states, including here in California. It has caused poultry and poultry products to require permits to enter, leave, or move within an HPAI control area. It is spread by migrating fowl to your backyard birds, and controlling it isn't easy, and it is deadly to your backyard flock. There are several counties in California that have control areas, as well as other states like Colorado, Indiana, Kansas, Michigan, Nebraska, North Carolina, Ohio, and South Dakota. Millions of birds across the nation due to this HPAI have had to be destroyed. And if you see a rise in the price of chickens or eggs, that could very well be one of the reasons. Highly pathogenic avian influenza, which means that poultry owners, commercial and backyard growers, need to practice what is called biosecurity. What is that? And how do you know that when you go shopping for chicks, as you might be doing as the weather warms up and you go into a feed store or a tractor supply company and you hear this cute little chip, 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 chip going on and you go over, oh, look at the cute little chicks. Let's buy some. How do you know they don't have it? Well, that's why we're talking with Cherie Sentis-Glover. She is the proprietor of the website chickensforeggs.com. She is an urban chicken consultant. She is a certified poultry inspector and does a lot of public speaking, including March 15th through 16th in Alabama, in Columbia, Alabama, at the National Backyard Poultry Conference. Cherie, let's talk about biosecurity, this avian influenza, only this is more deadly than the avian influenza that was going around a few years ago, and how to choose chicks and take care of them. That's a lot to talk about. Be my guest.
Hi, Fred.
Hi.
I'm so glad to talk about this because biosecurity is part of my passion. And back in the day, I don't think we really even thought about it or worried about it. And it wasn't until even myself as a poultry owner and keeper, it wasn't until something called the exotic Newcastle disease came out. And that was back in the 2000s. I think it was 2007 or 8, right around that time, and maybe 2006. And it was the first time that really, or first time in a long time, that California, gosh, it almost just shut down when it came to poultry. And it was because this disease, at that time it was exotic Newcastle disease, but it's really you just kept backyard chickens. It wasn't a big deal. And when that came about, it just created such a standstill with poultry shows, with the fairs and the expos. That's when CDFA and other groups actually put together educational materials to better educate the public about how easily something can be transmitted or spread. So avian flu it's scary because we hear about it in the news. And we wonder why. And it's because it has such a possible impact on commercial poultry producers. So everywhere where we get our eggs, where we get our meat, our chickens, all those dozens and dozens of roasted chickens that you see in Costco, that's what it impacts. Because if those producers have to euthanize their chickens because of an avian flu outbreak, it's significant. It paralyzes the industry, and it'll have a trickle down effect even to us as consumers. So, but then you add on the extra impact of what does that mean for me as a backyard chicken owner? We, at least here we are in this part of Central California, Northern California, we happen to be under the main Pacific flyway that waterfowl travel, right? It's when you all see all the geese flying down south and they come back up. And even here where I am, just kind of south and east of Sacramento, I don't know how many times a day I'll see flocks of geese. I can hear them coming. They fly over. And where I happen to live, I have a little bit more risk of exposure. And that's because we have ponds, right? We have lakes, we have rivers, we have places where the waterfowl like to congregate and maybe have a pit stop. That's the part of the avian flu that, the bird doesn't necessarily have to be sick. They can be carriers and look perfectly healthy, perfectly fine, but they can transmit that to our backyard flocks. There's two main ways that can happen. Either one, you could actually have that waterfowl come into your area, your yard, your property, spread through respiratory as well as through like feces, droppings, that kind of thing. Or us as an individual can be that kind of vector. And that includes, maybe we go for a hike, right? How many times do we go bicycling? I'll use you as an example, Fred.
Sure.
So you're bicycling, maybe you're going down a trail, you're down by, Folsom Lake, and, there happens to be, waterfowl out there. If you had a backyard flock of chickens, there's a possibility that even the tires on your bicycle could bring in and spread something like the avian flu. So we even ourselves, our shoes, our clothing, all of those things can actually put our own backyard flocks at risk if we've been in areas where wild birds or waterfowl have been.
So I guess one step for the backyard owner is to have several pairs of shoes, and especially the ones around where the chickens are that you would change into to go work on the chickens. Get out of your traveling shoes and put on your chicken shoes.
Exactly. So that's a lot of chicken keepers. What I'd suggest to them is have either a foot bath, foot wash, right? And that's basically a tub. You put in an old mat and you add some bleach and some water. You can do a foot bath, but you want to change your clothing. If I do consultations, for instance, I actually will not visit my own chickens that day that I do a consultation. And I have separate footwear that I wear, even a coveralls that I'll wear or an apron over when I inspect or help people with their chickens and their flocks. That immediately goes into a bag, and that goes nowhere near where my own home flock is located. So immediately washing and sanitizing. Even things like if you need to go to one of the 5 avian labs, right? The diagnostic labs that are throughout California. If you're dropping off a specimen, a poultry specimen for diagnostics, they actually have a place that you pull up with your vehicle and you spray down the tires before you even kind of enter the main part of the facility. And that's because of how important that biosecurity is, right? Even as simple as who do you allow come onto your property? Who has access to your birds, to your backyard chickens? I have friends that are duck hunters, right? Duck season is October through the end of January. And if you're a duck hunter and you actually have a backyard flock of chickens for eggs, you're out there in the environment. And it's really important to take those steps to literally have a change of clothes that you don't even come into your home with because of the fact that you could be the vector. You could be the person that's exposing your own chickens to the avian flu. Now, a good thing, what we know is that the avian flu does not infect humans, right? They have had cases in the past, but only in Southeast Asia. They have not had a case of human infection here in North America. So a lot of times when we see the news and we see, oh my gosh, avian flu, we think, oh my gosh, is it like Corona? Is it like COVID? And no, you're not going to contract avian flu, from your chickens or from the geese that landed, at your pond. But your chickens those are the ones that are at risk.
Are there other poultry that can catch this, the HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza, besides chickens? Could it possibly be, I don't know, doves, ducks, geese, partridges, quail?
All of them, yes.
Turkeys?
So they do. So that's one of the hardest parts about being a backyard poultry owner, is that how do you control that, right? How do you control everything that your birds are exposed to? Because they're foraging. You're letting them free range. That's always the big thing. The birds are able to go and forage and eat all the great, bugs and those kinds of things. But in that, there is that inherent risk. And I was watching one news report where a woman, she happened to have a backyard flock of chickens, and she lived right across the street from a commercial poultry producer that had been shut down. And they had to euthanize all of their birds because of the avian flu. And they interviewed her and they said, hey, are you concerned because you're literally right across the street? And she said something that piqued my interest. She said, there's only so much that you can control. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. I think as far as CDFA, as far as the state veterinarian, I think they want to make sure people are knowledgeable. They want people to understand what kinds of biosecure, security steps you can take, what you do have control over. So that way you can at least reduce some of that risk. But can you eliminate the risk entirely? I don't think so, especially living where we are, especially being under the main Pacific Flyway. I think it's a challenge.
You could build one heck of a large netted area, I guess.
You could. And some people do. So like even my own chicken coop for my layers, my chickens are in a completely closed chicken run. But I let them forage, right? I let them out, they free range, and then they go back in there at night. So they are definitely exposed to other wild birds. One time and I do have ducks. I have ducks and a goose over in my duck pen, which is actually on the other side from where my chickens are located. And one year, I went out there and I was counting them and I thought, wait a minute, I have extra birds. Come to find out, a wild feral pair of Muscovy ducks had actually stopped by and had dinner with my ducks. And that's a perfect example of how even something as innocent as having a couple of ducks in your backyard that might attract other waterfowl to come and stop by. So really, what do you have control over? So you can net up your entire chicken run. You can keep your chickens isolated. And I think that's what, like, for instance, the commercial poultry producers, that's what they focus on. But even them being in those enclosed environments, right, where they monitor who's coming in and out, they have protective clothing or PPE for their employees to wear. Even then, they manage to get exposed, which is really scary because even that kind of confinement, that kind of production facility that, obviously they have all of the cleaning protocols, all the biosecurity in place, and even they will have outbreaks. So what do you do?
Highly pathogenic avian influenza. Now, for the person who has no knowledge about chickens or this disease, but might be doing some chick shopping this late winter or early spring, how do they know that the chicks that they're looking at in that cute little container in the feed store or at the local farm supply store, how do you know those little chicks haven't been infected?
That's a very good question, Fred. How do you know that the chicks that you're buying haven't been exposed to the avian flu? Luckily, there are restrictions in place. So there are restrictions and there is documentation having to do with the movement of chicks or birds. But the good thing is that a baby chick that you're finding in the feed store likely has not had the kind of exposure that that they would need to become infected, right? So those chicks, they're hatched in a hatchery. They're typically shipped out to the feed store. And once they reach that feed store, there's actually a reason why they typically won't let you right up to where the birds are housed, right? They have little chicken brooders. They usually, if you go into any of the feed stores, they usually have them fenced off a little bit. And they are trying to limit that exposure to you. And that's because you could very well be carrying, or transmit on your shoes or clothing that avian flu if you haven't been following good biosecurity protocols. The chicks that you buy, they have had limited exposure. There's a good chance that they'll be perfectly fine once you take them home.
Smart Pots are the original award-winning fabric planter. They're sold worldwide. Smart Pots are proudly made 100% in the USA. Smart Pots are also BPA-free. There's no risk of chemicals leaching into the soil, your herbs, vegetables, and other edibles. That's why organic growers prefer Smart Pots. Smart Pots' breathable fabric creates a healthy root structure for plants. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes, and they can be reused year after year. If a frost or freeze is in the forecast, moving your frost-tender plants that are in the Smart Pots that have handles makes them even easier to move closer to the house for added warmth, or you could even move them inside. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight fabric containers. It's Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred for more info and that special Farmer Fred discount on your next Smart Pot purchase. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. You have a small yard and you think you don't have the room for fruit trees? Well, maybe you better think again, because Dave Wilson Nursery wants to show you how to grow great tasting fruits like peaches, apples, pluots, and nut trees. Plus, they have potted fruits such as blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, figs, grapes, hops, kiwi, olives, and pomegranates. These are all plants that you can grow in small areas. You can even grow many of them in containers on patios as well. It's called backyard orchard culture, and you can get step-by-step information via the Dave Wilson YouTube videos. So where do you find those? Well, just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. Also in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart. You can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard from May to December here in USDA Zone 9. And something else you're going to find in that Home Garden tab. You're going to find the closest nursery to you that carries Dave Wilson's quality fruit trees, and they're in nurseries from coast to coast. So start the backyard orchard of your dreams at davewilson.com. Let's get back to our conversation with chicken expert Cherie Sintis Glover and figure out, how can you tell a rooster from a hen when they're just chicks? Now, your biggest issue as a future chicken owner, a backyard chicken owner, and many localities now have laws that say it's okay to have backyard chickens, but they better not be roosters. So how do you pick one that isn't a rooster?
Luckily, there's a lot of breeds that we can actually determine what sex they are, and they will label them. So when you go to the feed store, you're looking at all of these different brooders, right? You can hear the baby chicks. They have the heat lamps going, and they're going to typically be marked. So you should know that if you see a sign that says straight run, there's a good chance that they're both males and females in that bin together, and it's kind of the luck of the draw, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have 50-50 chance, but a lot of people will swear by that. No, you'll buy 5 chicks and 4 of them will end up being roosters, right? Or males. So you take your chances with this anytime you pick your chicks from a bin that says standard run, right? Or straight run.
And I imagine that the bin marked standard run or straight run are your discount chicks.
Not necessarily.
Oh, really?
I think it really kind of depends on the breed. So some breeds are easier to sex early on than others. And so because of that, there's even chicks out there that are different colors depending on if they're male or female. So you may have the same breed, and that's why they call them sex links, as actually a common name for that type of laying hen or chicken, because they'll either be black or white or yellow, depending on what sex the bird is. But it's not that way for all of the breeds of chickens. But some people don't care. They will take the straight run chicks. If they end up being males, they'll either process them as meat birds and put them in the freezer when they're old enough or have gained enough weight, or they'll take them to like an auction, that kind of thing. So the other option is you'll find bins that are labeled pullets. And if you see that word pullets, that means that those birds, hopefully, fingers crossed, have been identified as females. And so you're more likely to, those should be all pullets that you're taking home. Now, you are at the mercy of maybe whoever unpacked those chicks, right? And you're thinking, from the hatchery and the way they're packaged and packed up, the chicks are shipped out to when they get to the feed store and put in the bins. You're hoping that none of them accidentally escaped or maybe got put in the wrong bin. But it does happen, right? It does happen where you're like, gosh, I picked those from the pullet bin. And why is this male in there? I have a rooster. So it can happen. And it's unfortunately, part of the risk of bringing new baby chicks home is that there's always a chance that a couple might be a couple here and there might be roosters. Luckily, we have people that are willing to buy them. A lot of people are willing to, maybe process them and put them in their freezer. Or we have different poultry auctions, actually, where you can go and put them up for sale. So there are ways that you can find homes for those roosters, because nobody, especially if you're living in an urban environment, you never want to, it's just not a great idea to have a rooster.
Unless you live in Yuba City.
Oh, yes. Do you know, I was driving through Yuba City and we stopped by the Carl's Jr. to run in and use the washroom. And oh my gosh, there were chickens everywhere. And we took a picture because we were like, where did these chickens come from? And they're becoming kind of like, was it Fair Oaks? I think Fair Oaks had their own set of like
correct
random.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Yuba City, I mean, I went up there for a bike ride. Spent 2 nights in a motel up there because it was a 100-mile ride. At 3 a.m., all of a sudden it's and, I'm in a motel. It was a nice motel. And all of a sudden, I mean, this thing is right outside my door. And I brought this up to the clerk in the morning, and I said, now, I'm probably not the only person to have mentioned this. And she said, you're not the only person. We get it every day.
Wow.
Chickens are a protected species in Yuba City, and they're allowed to roam. And every motel in town has chickens roaming the parking lot. But that's neither here nor there. But my question to you is, at what age will a rooster reveal itself to be a rooster?
It depends on the breed. So just like laying hens, like typically your average laying hen will start to lay eggs once they've reached anywhere from 5 to 8 months of age, right? That's when they've kind of reached that maturity. Same thing goes for roosters. And chickens, when you're raising them, there's this really kind of weird, they come out, they hatch, they're little fluffy, cute, adorable chicks. Then by the time they're 2 months old, they start to get their feathers in. They kind of look like, they're like the teenagers, and they look kind of scruffy because their feathers are all wacky and trying to grow in. And by the time they get to the 4 or 5 month range, of age, that's when sometimes for some breeds that mature a little bit earlier, you'll find them starting to try and crow. Mm. For other breeds, it's a little bit later. But what I notice more is their behavior early on. So when you have a brooder of chicks and you're watching them, what you'll find is if there's any males in that group, the male chicks will tend to try to almost herd the other chickens. So they have those behaviors and those characteristics sometimes early on, where you can see how they're trying to kind of be the boss of the brooder. And if you see that and you see that behavior, there's a chance that could be a rooster. Now, there's that period of time where the males and the females, no matter what the breed, they look very much alike. And it's not until those more adult bird feathers start to come in that you might see changes. So for instance, in the tail feathers or the sickle feathers, even around the neck and even around the way the comb develops might be a sign, but it really just depends on the breed. Typically, by the time they're 5 to 6 months old, you're going to have a pretty good idea. They're either going to start to try to crow, maybe even a little sooner, maybe a little later. And it doesn't sound at all like a crow. It kind of, but they'll angle their bodies and they'll try to produce sound, and it'll sound a little gargled and a little kind of like for guys when their voice, remember when they're, you get that certain age and the voice cracks, right?
I'm still waiting.
You're what?
I'm still waiting.
Oh, you're still waiting. So it's sometimes like that. It sounds really awkward and it sounds really like, what was that? Like almost like something's dying. That's sometimes you have to wait till then to figure it out. I raise Polish bantams that have a big crest of feathers on their heads. And you have a very small window within like the first 2 days after a chick hatches to be able to sex them looking at the wing feathers. And then after that, it can be a toss up until they actually reach, a more mature age. It can be tough. And that's, what's funny, Fred, is that is like the number one question in all these different chicken groups and forums. It's almost always, especially when we get into the spring months, when people have hatched chicks or they picked up some from the feed store. It's people posting pictures of their chickens and trying to figure out, hey, can you tell me if this is a rooster? And I wish it was that easy, but a lot of times it isn't.
We have talked about in the past a lot of variables about the different varieties and which are best for children or which are best for egg laying and all that. We're not going to have time to get into all of that, but you have in the past mentioned several resources that are good for information for new chicken owners that basically covers everything that they would need to know.
Yeah. So, what's so great is that the Cooperative Extension for California, if you're looking online, Dr. Pitsky actually created a whole series of backyard basics for poultry, which I actually just got into myself. And I thought, Guy, this is fantastic because we didn't have that back in the day. There's a lot of videos on YouTube and evaluating to kind of see what kind of information is out there because there is a lot of misinformation. But if you have kids, oh my gosh, I definitely get enrolled in 4-H or Grange. Older kids can join FFA to learn more about backyard poultry or raising chickens. Any of those youth organizations are a wealth of information. And then as adults, be discerning in what you read or watch. I always tend to go with the universities or cooperative extension offices for more information, or even go to things like the Cooptastic. It's an annual national backyard poultry conference, and it's a great way to meet other poultry owners from across the nation and learn everything from basics to advanced techniques with your chickens. If you're local to me, you could even reach out to me and use me as a resource as a consultant. And that's what people typically hire me to do is they want someone to come to them or do a consultation through, Zoom and kind of learn the basics. It's like having a private class on backyard chicken keeping, because sometimes it's not as simple as just building a coop and putting some chickens in there. There's sometimes more to it, especially if you're dealing with ordinances and you just want someone to kind of help you through what you need. And that will give you a better idea of what are you getting yourself into with getting a backyard flock.
Well, let's cover some of the basics that you've mentioned here. You mentioned the University of California reference from Cooperative Extension called Backyard Basics of Poultry. Well, sure enough, I just entered into a search engine, Backyard Basics of Poultry, followed by the letters UCANR, University of California Ag and Natural Resources, UCANR. And sure enough, that page popped right up. And you mentioned yourself, and your website is chickensforeggs.com, where people can find out more information not only about you, but about that National Backyard Poultry Conference, Cooptastic, that you referred to, that you will be speaking on in March down in Alabama.
Yes, it'll be a great time because just the fact that you're meeting other people and they're interested, and I would not be surprised if I see everybody in different types of chicken t-shirts.
Yeah.
And, and just being able to talk to experts, right? That either have the experience or the education and knowledge that they're willing to share. And that's huge. There's even, and I want to mention that the Avian Science Program, they're actually in the process of putting together a really cool app. They had an app in the past, but but I think they're phasing that out, and they're just getting ready to do a test run or trial run for a brand new app for backyard poultry enthusiasts. So there's a lot of resources, especially when it comes to technology and what we can find online. But I always, use your critical thinking skills when it comes to that. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but there's also some really great stuff too. So be willing to educate yourself and find those great resources online.
In the past, you've even mentioned books that are good for this, for the new chicken owner.
Oh my gosh, my favorite one is City Chicks. And it's because it's packed full of all of this great information, whether you live in an urban environment versus a rural environment. But they especially focus in on someone that's maybe also a home gardener and how to kind of foster that relationship between having backyard chickens and having a wonderful garden at the same time, because sometimes that can be tricky. Another one is by the Story series, and Gail Nevereau, and I'm probably pronouncing her last name incorrectly, but she has a wonderful chicken book, and she also does a chicken health guide. Those are fantastic. And even, believe it or not, even the chicken keeping or backyard chickens for dummies, full of information. Some great books out there.
Very good. And we should point out that City Chicks, that first book you mentioned, actually goes by the full title, City Chicks, Keeping Micro Flocks of Laying Hens as Garden Helpers, Compost Creators, Biorecyclers, and Local Food Suppliers. And it's written by Patricia Foreman, but I guess the short name for that book is City Chicks.
Chicks. Yes. That's my number one book. I love that book.
And the other book that you mentioned is Story's Guide to Raising Chickens by Gail Damerow, Damerow. So if you're looking for good books that you can, go through at your leisure to figure out how you raise a chick, the Story's Guide to Raising Chickens and the book City Chicks would be very good sources to have handy. If you have books... You kids, your electricity might go out and all you're going to have left is books. Have a book. Thank you. This is brought to you by your local publisher. I'm done. All right. Anything you want to add?
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you. So I went into the feed store yesterday to pick up some chicken feed, and I overheard a woman that was in there. She wanted to get a bunny rabbit for Easter for her child. And it's that time of year when people are going to feed stores. They're seeing the chicks are starting to arrive and come in, and they're just adorable. And you want so much to take them home because you've always wanted to raise chickens, but you just haven't. And you know all these other people that have. But there's more to it than that. You want to have it staged at home. You want to have your coop ready. You want to have your brooder ready. There's so much to prepare for. Don't be that person that takes them home without doing a little bit of research, taking a class, getting a little bit of knowledge about what you need to be successful with them, because those first few weeks with those baby chicks is just so important. And you want to be successful, right? Nothing is worse than having it not work out as planned, right? So do a little research.
Don't just take the chicks home from the store in a paper bag, because you'll be back at the store to get everything else you need.
Yes. Have your brooder already ready. Already have, think about what breeds you want, because there's so many to choose from. And it can be a really joyous occasion, or it can be a really devastating occasion if things don't go well. Don't be that.
Don't be that person.
Be that person.
So yes, do your homework first. There's a lot to go into. And if you have a chance to visit Cherie Sintas Glover and attend one of her talks that she has frequently around Central and Northern California, or in the case of March 15th and 16th in Alabama, you ought to go to that National Backyard Poultry Conference. And more information about that, called Cooptastic, you can find out at chickensforeggs.com, which is Cherie Sintas Glover's homepage with a lot of good chicken raising information. Cherie, it's always a pleasure talking with you about chickens, and I hope everybody has a good winter and a good spring with their backyard flock, and you have a good time in Alabama.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Fred.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast has a lot of information posted at each episode in the show notes. Maybe you'd rather read it than listen to it. That's not a problem. We have a complete transcript posted, and you can find that link in the show notes or on our new homepage, gardenbasics.net. That's where you can find that link as well as all the previous episodes of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. There you can leave a message or link up with our social media pages, including our YouTube video page. And at gardenbasics.net, click on the tab at the top of the page to read the Garden Basics Beyond Basics newsletter. Plus, in the show notes, there are links to any products or books mentioned during the show and other helpful links for even more information. Want to leave us a question? Again, check the links at gardenbasics.net. And when you click on any episode at gardenbasics.net, you're going to find a link to SpeakPipe, where you can leave us an audio question without making a phone call. Or go to them directly, speakpipe.com/gardenbasics. You want to call us? We have that number posted at gardenbasics.net. Spoiler alert, it's 916-292-8964, 916-292-8964. Email? Sure, send it along with your pictures to fred@farmerfred.com. Or again, go to gardenbasics.net to get that link. And if you send us a question, be sure to tell us where you're gardening, because as I am fond of saying, all gardening is local. Find it all at gardenbasics.net. Garden Basics with Farmer Fred comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Garden Basics, it's available wherever podcasts are handed out. For more information about the podcast, visit our website, gardenbasics.net, and that's where you can find out about the free Garden Basics newsletter, Beyond the Basics. And thank you so much for listening.